The thing that makes humans human isn't necessarily logic.
Every time there's great change in the world, it tends to scare people.
It feels like it is just a step in the whole human evolution, where we've kind of fallen into a culture where we shop for opinions as opposed to form our own.
We can now have AI training in AI, and AI training in AI. That can either lead the entire system to snowball or the entire system to collapse. History has shown us that technology will always outpace regulation.
All right. Good afternoon and good seeing you again.
Good seeing you too, Roger.
So we were just talking about how this is a repeat visitor here. What do you think so far between all the folks that I've spoken this time around and in our previous conversations?
Selfishly speaking, it's always an honor and a privilege to be around such brilliant people, people with great breadth and depth. It reminds me, as we talk about artificial intelligence, which I think we would acknowledge is really a marketing term for linear algebra and deep learning, something that has been around for some time but is advancing at a rapid pace. Nothing substitutes something we don't fully understand, and that's the human mind's neurosynaptic connectivity and neuroplasticity, which is unique. And to answer your question directly, when surrounded by all these great people, I'm reminded of that. So I don't know that AI, as we call it, will ever replace that.
Yeah. It feels like it is just a step in the whole human evolution. Like the genie's out of the bottle, right? I took an Uber here today and the human was listening and looking at the instructions the machine gave. As I was coming in here, I was speaking with another gentleman who was talking about how they're pricing claims, they're underwriting insurance, they're processing claims, and they're using all sorts of analytics and different ways to learn about what's actually going on. I mean, I don't think this stuff goes away, right? The question is, how pervasive does it get in our lives?
Yeah, it certainly gets faster and faster, and it has a snowball effect. Mm-hmm. Every time there's great change in the world, it tends to scare people. People don't like change in general. This isn't something that's going to be the demise of society. It's something that's going to make everybody better. I believe firmly it's going to raise the water table. The other comment was made earlier, what kind of jobs is it going to displace? Well, frankly, it's going to make people's lives a lot easier. To put it not so politely, it's going to remove a lot of the shit work in people's lives. And that's an attribute to society. The real key here is that people utilizing this unique computing processing power that we have in our own brains and the unique way in which it operates is the ultimate arbiter of how these systems function and work. Now, the statement's been made repeatedly, and it'll be made again because it's an accurate one. It is not a cliche, garbage in, garbage out. Well, we're the ones who control that garbage.
That's true.
What is interesting to me is the snowball effect of these AI machines, how we can now have AI training in AI, and AI training in AI. That can either lead the entire system to snowball or the entire system to collapse. We still have to intervene in how the systems are trained.
That's a good point. That sounds like you're saying, even though we have machines teaching machines, it becomes even more important that we watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can actually set up two of them at the same time and watch them create an infinite loop.
Yep.
A comment was made recently in the symposium that we were at, how you can get them to talk to each other and eventually they will get stuck repeating themselves.
What do you think are the most important questions that board members, that regulators, that innovators actually should be thinking about that maybe is left by the wayside or not as prioritized?
My concern continues to be how the information is utilized and how it's sourced that comes out of the system. The question keeps coming up, what is the source of truth? Right? Well, if the systems aren't seeded correctly with various facts and then opinions, okay, and then how are we the arbiters of what is a fact?
Yeah.
Okay? When you and I were in college, we had to cite source on everything. And then if you were well read, you researched what the source was. So when boards are making decisions based on these AI systems, they need to understand, as again, I'll quote Gus, the show me button. How did
Yeah.
they come up with that information? And are we spending enough time to actually look at it and make sure that that information is valid that's come out of it?
Yeah, that's a great point. So you were just telling me how your kids are grown, but there's a lot of people out there that have young kids. And one of the things I'm noticing is that we kind of lose our ability to do critical thinking, to go collect the facts ourselves, because we've kind of fallen into a culture where we shop for opinions as opposed to form our own.
Right. Well, and society has changed drastically, even in our news sources. I think that reasonable people could all stipulate to the fact that most news sources, not all, but most, are effectively editorial sources at this standpoint. So unless these systems are even seated with both of those opinion at the margin interpretation of facts, what information are you getting? And then what information are our children discerning from that as well? Is going to be super important in that critical thinking about having the kids actually make an analysis of how was that information derived? Was history being rewritten in the process, and where did it originate from?
Do you think there should be regulation around it, or should it just be let the market kind of figure it out?
Well, the question of regulation comes up regularly, and history has shown us that technology will always outpace regulation. Those of us who remember the Can-Spam Act, all right, a bunch of well-meaning policymakers came forward to try and stop the spread of spam. How well did that work? It didn't work at all. So when internet gambling, there was an effort to try and stop that, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you agree or disagree with that from a principle standpoint. All that happened was effectively the servers moved offshore. So I am not a fan of regulation. I am an enormous proponent of making sure that we live by a principled code that says the sovereignty of the individual is first and foremost. Right? The individual's privacy, the ability for them to make their decisions, the ability for them to have free speech, even if we don't like what they're saying, needs to exist. Those have to be some core principles around under which we operate. When we start getting into a regulatory environment, that allows all sorts of hands into things that may not be a very good thing at all. So to answer your question directly, I would be an advocate of less regulation and not more regulation.
There's no such thing as truly objective. We all see the world through our own eyes, right? So it's more just about being able to foster that forum where you have different opinions and let each group kind of figure it out.
Correct. From one individual state of consciousness, they may not be evil or doing something evil. From their state of consciousness, they're doing something really well. But if there isn't a forum, or we're manipulating the information that comes out of that forum, and in this case, the information that is derived out of, for instance, a large language model, it can manipulate the entire way that a mass population even thinks about something. We need to be very careful with that. How that's regulated, I don't believe it can be regulated. I think actually it's mathematically impossible to regulate that.
It's the toothpaste is out of the tube,
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think about all the stuff that's going on with war in the world today? I keep hearing about machines, and I see on the news, you got drones and you got all of these different things that can actually take lives. Is that a concern? I mean, are we ever going to have to think about Skynet?
Well, anytime people lose lives, it should be a concern, and it should be taken very seriously. And there's a lot of people dying around the world right now, in my opinion, very unnecessarily. Reasonable people with diplomacy can get in a room and say, hey, let's stop everybody from fighting and then figure out why they're fighting. So that's more of the human diplomatic side of it. That also, by the way, is something because of the unique ability of humans' fluid intelligence is not something that AI is going to go in and fix. Now, to answer your question directly about AI controlling essentially the battlefield, I believe the general who preceded this conversation said it very well. Commanders on the battlefield still ultimately have to make that decision. That decision must come from a human being. The day that we allow a linear algebraic system to make a decision to take a human life is not a good day. Fortunately, within a lot of military systems around the world, that condition exists where there's a human override.
I feel like there's a lot of fear out there in popular culture and people talking about it. But when I look at legal frameworks and talk to businesses that are running mission critical systems, there's always a question of liability and ultimately who's actually responsible. I'm not really seeing that many places where people are saying, let's just cede all control.
Well, you bring up a very good point, and the litigious complexity of this is non-trivial. I'll use an example. The team at Tesla has done an extremely good job with the latest beta release of the auto drive software in the Model S. It's spooky good. So at what point do legislators in certain areas of governing law then determine, policymakers determine, that the car is safer than the driver is, that the human driver is,
Yep.
and then stop your ability to drive your own car down the freeway? And then if there is an error, whether it be in the code or something that is simply mathematically out of control of the vehicle, then who's liable at that point?
Mm-hmm.
And then should have the driver actually turned over the ability to the car to drive itself, or should have the driver picked up the control itself? These are complex legal issues that surround the technical component as well, and they're advancing rapidly.
Yes.
Rapidly.
And I think there should be that forum where we talk about it, right? I'm thinking about, was it 10, maybe 20 years ago? For drunk driving, you have breathalyzers that will shut off your car, right?
Right. Well, now the drunk driver can just get into the car and let it drive itself home. No, I'm not suggesting that whatsoever, but it is remarkable what a phenomenal job they've done, even in its current state iteration. And I, for one, don't want to see a day where legislators say, okay, the car can drive better than you can, so you're no longer allowed to drive your own car. I'm willing to take the risk for me driving my own car.
Yeah.
It's the old, safety versus freedom argument. And we as societies at the micro level and at the macro level have to make decisions as to how we want to be governed in that regard.
And there's market-based ways, right? The conversation I had with the insurance executive, that we've seen car insurance where they let you install a telematic device for a discount. So there's more than one way. You don't have to have government regulation. It could be market-based, but I think all of these are things that people should discuss and figure out.
So that's an interesting scenario that you just point out there. As long as the individual remains sovereign in their ability to choose, right? The day that the insurance industry or public regulators say you're no longer allowed to choose and we're just going to spy on you and then set your rates, I don't believe that's good.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Anything else on your mind?
Well, it's a great era to be alive. We're seeing technology snowball at a quantum pace now. You and I grew up in an era where it was geometric progression.
Yes.
And then we started seeing exponential progression. We're seeing literally quantum level evolution right now. Human consciousness is evolving at an absolutely rapid pace. And the things that we've already seen in our lifetimes and the things that we're going to be able to see in our lifetimes are extraordinary. And I'm extremely bullish on the future.
Yeah.
Future's bright.
And I think your point around AI making our lives easier is true. And at the same time, it's not going to take over, because everywhere I look, the thing that makes humans human isn't necessarily logic. You take a look at Gen AI, how it went out. You put the mirror up against ourselves. We don't like it. Now we're going to put all sorts of rules to restrict what it sends back, right? So given those types of parameters, I think, we got a lot to look forward to, because there's certainly a lot of drudgery in our lives, having to collate our own data, look through things. To automate some of that is good. And then in financial services, where I come from, that's always the problem, right? You got so much stuff. Can I just speed up the process of collating it? But then I still want to be able to do my own analysis, because that's my advantage. It's
going to open up our minds for even greater possibilities that we haven't even conceived of. Most neuroscientists would stipulate or agree to, we use somewhere in the range of 10% of the capacity in our brains. Imagine when we get to a point of using even 70% of what's available in our brains, being able to clear some of the space out because of these systems.
Even
what we're going to be capable of doing.
Or 30% is going to be huge.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right.